Going back to the TikTok ban.
What I believe about TikTok, and this is something which is very close to my heart, because I've recently in the United States published, let me plug my recent book called Techno-Feudalism, What Killed Capitalism. In it, I delve into what I consider to be the most interesting economic and socio-economic transformation of the last 10 years. We have a new form of capital, which I call cloud capital. It's what lives in your phone. TikTok is one example, but so is Google, and so on and so forth. My hypothesis, Hassan, is that this is a unique form of capital. Capital so far, up until we had algorithmic capital, or cloud capital as I call it. What was capital? It was produced means of production, things that you create in order to build other stuff, like you have a tractor in order to produce corn, you have a steam engine in order to produce textiles. With what lives inside TikTok, what lives inside YouTube or Facebook or Amazon.com for that matter, it's a produced means of behavior modification, not of producing anything. Jeff Bezos is not producing anything. He's just produced the capital with which he has created a fiefdom in which he encases buyers and sellers. He doesn't produce anything himself, but he charges 40% rent on the deals that are struck by buyers and sellers. Anyone who owns that cloud capital, immensely powerful. They have a remarkable new powers to extract value from others, whether they are proletarians, petty bourgeois, small-scale, old-fashioned capitalists. Why am I telling you all this? If you think about it, there are two locations on the planet where cloud capital is concentrated. Europe doesn't have any. India doesn't have any. Africa doesn't have any. It's the United States and China. Why did Donald Trump start the Cold War, the new Cold War between the United States and China? It's not Taiwan. This is a very boring, a very lazy explanation. China's position on Taiwan never changed. It's not the fact that the Chinese are spying on the Americans, as if the Americans are not spying on everyone. It's not the military build-up of China until I see naval vessels of the Chinese Navy patrolling California or, just outside Virginia. It's really unbelievable that they are worried about the Chinese military prowess. No, it's because the Chinese have developed their own, they have an advantage over the American big tech. And let me tell you what my hypothesis is as to the nature of that advantage. In the United States, you have Silicon Valley, big tech, and you have Wall Street, two centers of massive power. Wall Street extracts huge financial rents from the rest of the world, primarily, of course, in the United States, and big tech extracts what I call cloud rents, algorithmic rents, call them if you want. The two of them, though, have not merged because Wall Street will never allow Apple or Google to take over its capacity, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan's capacity to extract financial rents. Cloud capital and financial capital in the United States are divided and in a kind of rivalry. In China, they have merged. Under the Communist Party, their cloud capital and the financial system have been merged. There is this app called WeChat, before we go to TikTok, provides free banking to everyone. Free banking to everyone. You can make transactions to anybody independently of where they are banking. Imagine that in the United States, Wall Street will never allow that.
Well, Elon Musk wanted to do that. I'm just kidding. He's not.
But Goldman Sachs will not allow him.
Well, Goldman Sachs, I think his own incompetence will never allow him, but that's besides the point.
Well, yes, indeed. Even if you had the most competent version of Elon Musk, Wall Street would murder him, would find a way of annihilating. Whereas in China, they have merged. Add to that the fact that the Chinese central bank is now providing, did you know that? It's providing free digital wallets to everyone who wants them. Even you can have one. You don't have to be Chinese. And with that, you have free transactions, in one, of course. Now, so far, this is not a threat, or hasn't been a threat, to the preponderance of the power of the American dollar, because the Chinese capitalists themselves want dollars, and they want the dollar system. They do not want the one system. But the war in Ukraine, by confiscating 400 billion of Russian money, the United States and the European Union, it has created a lot of interest in Saudi Arabia, in the United Arab Emirates, in Indonesia, amongst oligarchs, Russian oligarchs, of course, but some Ukrainian oligarchs too, in putting their money in the Chinese system, as a hedge, in case the Americans get pissed off with them and confiscate their money in the way that they confiscated the Russian money. Chinese cloud capital and cloud finance to create a clear and present danger to the monopoly of the international payment system based on the dollar.
The SWIFT is what you're talking about, right? Like, I mean, the financial transactions being made on the dollar.
Yes, and don't let anyone tell you that SWIFT is European. It is formally European. It's completely controlled by the United States. Donald Trump switched it off like that against Iran when he felt like it, against the advice and the wishes of Angela Merkel and the whole of the European Union.
Oh, yeah.
So the reason I'm saying that is because Donald Trump started a new Cold War because the people around him, not himself, the Donald can't think strategically to save his life, but the people around him, and they're not all dumb. It's a big mistake to think that they were dumb. They could see that the Chinese agglomeration of cloud capital and financial capital was presenting a clear and present danger to the monopoly of the dollar, which is the only reason why the United States can have huge deficits and still increase its hegemony around the world, the American dollar and its monopoly. They could see that the Chinese were about to create a superhighway, digital superhighway of payments that was competing with the American dollar. And they started what? With banning Huawei, then ZTE, remember, then these quite large tariffs on Chinese exports. And then Joe Biden comes in and turbocharges the new Cold War by banning advanced microchips from going to China in order to slow down the development of this superhighway, digital highway of Chinese financial and big tech capital. Was always going to be one, Donald Trump has been talking about TikTok a long time because it's part of this attempt to bring down Chinese big tech. Because, as I said, it is only Chinese big tech which has a very able competitor to Google, to Facebook, to Instagram, to all that. Nobody else does. So TikTok was always going to be. Then comes Gaza. And I'm sure you have experienced that. My tweets on Gaza are not seen by anyone. I have 1.2 million followers. Almost no one sees my tweets because the algorithm owned by Elon Musk makes sure that when I tweet something about Gaza, me and my dog only hear it or hear the tweeting sounds. But TikTok is very different because they cannot control it. So they already had a reason to ban or take over, Americanize, and now they have an even greater one. And they never let a little crisis like Gaza go to waste when they have a long-term new Cold War defunking Chinese big tech. But I don't think they will manage to do it. Even if they take over TikTok in the United States, even if they ban it, I think the United States establishment is on a losing streak.
No, I absolutely agree. I think one of the reasons for that is because, and I guess I hate to admit this, but like the Dengist gambit, as I like to call it, is a very successful one because the greatest weakness that Western liberal capitalist democracies presents is their actual biggest strength, the strength of like social liberties, civil liberties to a certain degree, of course, but more importantly, treats. We love treats, and that has a sedating effect on all Americans, all people living in the Western world. That like government interference with our treats can never happen. That we will get very upset, especially here in America. Like a big part of the COVID lockdown protests originally were not on the virtue of like, oh, we can't get money, we can't work, but it was actually about like not being able to get a haircut, not being able to go to Applebee's. And while it seems really silly, I think that our appetite for that sort of thing was very usefully weaponized, I guess, in some respects by the Dengist government at the time. And that paired up with obviously the interests of capitalists that were consistently in the face of profit rates declining, wanted to squeeze out as much profits as possible by outsourcing labor to China, which was going to be very cheap. That I think was obviously very successful in bringing about this incredibly prosperous Chinese development over the course of the past couple of decades. And I think a very similar dynamic exists within TikTok as well. Obviously, social media is heavily regulated internally in China. TikTok doesn't exist in China. They have Douyin. They have a different version of TikTok in China. They have a very valuable Western-facing product that America only makes up, I think, like 10% of the market share on, which or the user base on. I'm sure that like they probably generate a lot more value from the American market in general. Overall, it's phenomenally successful because it offers, in the simplest terms, what Americans want to see. It's very good at giving you exactly what you want to see. It's very good at being addictive. The lack of restriction and the lack of regulation that is at the core of, I guess, like American identity, American individualism, is what is inevitably causing our own downfall in many respects. If you were to think about TikTok as though it's like is a very successful product, a successful product that does not exist in China, and the very same product exists very differently in China, as a matter of fact. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. The small mercies in Western life that you describe as treats have always been marketized and commodified superbly by American conglomerates, whether this was Coca-Cola or McDonald's or Hershey's or whatever. We've seen this in Mad Men with Don Draper doing a fantastic job at commodifying all this, commodifying nostalgia, commodifying the need for escapism and all that. Meanwhile, the deal between the United States and China that Washington understood as the backbone for the great friendship, the love-in between Washington and Beijing, beginning with Nixon in Beijing, the American authorities thought of it as a straightforward, old-fashioned trade thing. Aluminium is produced no longer in the United States, produced in Shanghai, it's shipped over, it goes through the process of the customs office. The American government can control the tariffs, they can control how much aluminium goes in, they can slow down the degree to, the speed at which aluminium is going into the United States. In other words, it's done under the terms of the United States. The Chinese capitalists producing the aluminium depend on the dollar. They keep their money in Wall Street. They buy real estate in Miami, so they are controlled. They are forced, essentially, because they have no other alternative, to buy U.S. Treasury bills. Essentially, the Chinese become a fund, a slush fund for the American government to run large deficits. It's a beautiful deal for the United States.
And it's not just the Chinese profits, though. This exists for every citizen, as long as they're rich capitalists. And the reason why I mention that is because there's a lot of xenophobia in America, and like the Chinese investments are still, I think, like 17 on that long list of other nations that like buy land, or other nations that buy capital in general in America.
There is very heavily restricted on what they can buy by the United States. They have to keep their money in the dollar system, but if they try to buy Google, they will not be allowed. Even the Japanese now are not allowed to buy
US
a steel company.
Yeah.
Here is the great contrast between aluminium, which I used as an example. I could have used cars, I could have used clothes, textiles, whatever. TikTok is very different because TikTok is not produced in China. TikTok is produced by you guys in the United States, because the capital that is necessary to create TikTok is tiny. Of course, by your standards and mine is large, all the servers and the stuff. But in terms of the greater scheme of things, there's not that much. It was a very clever algorithm. How much did it cost? A minuscule amount in comparison to how much it takes to produce aluminium and send it over to the United States and so on, right? And who is the real producer of the capital stock of TikTok? Every time you upload a video on TikTok, you are adding to the cloud capital of TikTok. And that maddens the American authorities, because here you have a business model, a Chinese business model, which operates in the United States. It doesn't have a productive base in China, but it amasses in a manner through a process which is not under the control of the Customs Office, of the IRS, of the Trade Department of the United States, of the FTC, of the Federal Reserve. And that, to them, is anathema. They would love to have it in China, but they are loath to allow the Chinese to have it in the United States. They should throw the ball in the court of the United States authorities and say, if you want to ban us, ban us. We're not selling.
Why would they? It's a very powerful tool in general. I don't think they're gonna sell. I think that they are going to. Yeah, they're gonna force the American government to make a very unpopular decision